So my question is, in the church, it seems like over the past, I don't know how long, we've tried to really make programs for kids and teens to keep them in the church. We've done all these really fun things, and apparently it hasn't worked. So I wondered if you could maybe talk about that and maybe offer advice to the church on what we're doing wrong.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I love giving advice on what you're doing wrong. So, listen, a lot of it is working, right? So it's not either or, and I think the heart behind it is so important. Are you trying to grow a church? Are you trying to grow people? And sometimes it feels like the same thing, but I think this next generation really sees the difference. We interviewed one person who said, we were asking about the relational connections that they have with the youth pastor at a particular church, and they said, this person was paid to be my friend. They were part of the church marketing department. And so that's a question. This is a generation that's more skeptical. They're more marketed to. They see sort of the, sort of behind the scenes. Like we're here behind the scenes, but they see behind the scenes more clearly. So the key question we have to keep asking ourselves is the heart for this to create an emotional climate for these young people to experience God's grace, restoration, the truth of the gospel. Are they building meaningful relationships? One of the things we'll talk about in the second session. But programs can work. They just have to have the right heart and the right sort of commitment to the outcomes, not just running a program for a program's sake.
Yeah, it's good. Good. All right, we got Laura. Laura, you want to stand up here? Yep.
Hi, I'm just wondering if you know the research that you've done, if it's been the people who've come up with all these statistics and that, if they've been taken because of the leadership or because of the lay people, like their experiences with leadership in the church, or more with the lay people?
It's a combination. I mean, certainly those who are in leadership have an even higher responsibility because they're like, well, you're the ones who should know how to do this. And again, the whole idea of the church is not that we're such uber professionals that we have it all down all the time. In fact, one of the things that we saw in the meaningful relationships of this Faith for Exiles is that really healthy churches actually talk about being disappointed in your leaders and how do you deal with that. They talk about how to deal with being passive aggressive because that's we excel at that as human in part of our human nature. So they take the emotional climate and they take it very seriously. And so it's a combination of a greater pedestal for leaders, a greater set of expectations, but really effective churches right-size the expectations that people have of their leaders. They're constantly talking about, Jesus is the senior pastor of our church. Like, you don't look to me. They take lots of breaks, so they're not like sabbaticals, and they have guest speakers, and so they do lots of things very intentionally to say you're not here for me. You're here for Jesus. But to guard our hearts as lay people too, because the judgmentalism and sort of the sideways glances that happen because of the good church people trying to do the right thing, but we'll see if you ever fully measure up. That emotional climate is really, really rough. We'll talk about this in the meaningful relationships, hopefully we'll get to in the live interview. But the way you could measure whether you have the kind of meaningful relationships that will actually grow young disciples, and frankly any of us, is whether people want to be around them, like they like hanging out, and they want to be like those people. They want to emulate, they want to give money like they see other people giving money. They want to do missions work like they see other people doing missions work. I have this guy, David Metters, that I write about in the book, and he prays, and he's just like the coolest Christian. And when I grow up, I hope I'm a Christian like David Metters. And you hear that kind of discussion in people in churches that have that kind of right emotional climate. They're like, man, I want to hang out with David Metters. I want to be like David Metters. He's the kind of Christian that I want to be. You see that kind of, it becomes etched in your limbic system.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's a way of thinking about that.
All right, the other Dave, or Dave, sorry, but it's the other, but Dave.
You talked about the changing landscape of the church. What are you hopeful for 20 years out from now, and what the church will look like?
Well, it's hard to project as a researcher, honestly, more than 3 to 5 years. But I'm ultimately and fundamentally hopeful for the church in the next 100,000 years until the Lord comes. But it's going to be a tough next five years, next few decades, as this generation has to sort of face up to all the challenges that we have, the ubiquity of porn. I mean, that's just that's an obvious one, but it is never before in human history have we had instant access at screens, and so this generation of young men is just they're just in flames. Young women more than ever, and it's an example of this sort of digital Babylon and the pressures that are unprecedented. And so I say that I'm not being very hopeful when you ask about hope, but I'm saying that I'm actually hopeful about the way the church could respond, because ultimately the only true response to issues of pornography, among many other kinds of problems, is that the church being the church. And we see that the church is able to love, restore, redeem people, help them have a countercultural response to things like pornography. So I'm super hopeful about the opportunities the church has to do that. That's a lot of what the Faith for Exiles theme is all about.
That's good. All right, Prince. Prince, you have still a question? Prince, Lee right there, yeah.
Thank you. So here in the West, we are witnessing the massive exodus of young people from the church. But in other parts of the world, we are seeing the great inflow of young people into the church. Have your research been expanded to understand why that is happening?
Great question, and thank you for asking, Prince. In about a month, on September 10th, we have a big webcast called Faith for the Future. And it is the first time that Barna has released a study really beyond North America and beyond the US. Most of our work for 25 years, I bought the company from the founder, George Barna, in 2009. And for 25 years, he said, America is complicated enough. We're not going to go try to do research outside of it. But I felt when I purchased the company and the Lord called me to lead the company that we had to understand the broader culture. So we've been slowly moving out into other places. So on September 25th, September 10th, we'll launch this big study. And so we have 25 countries, 15,000 interviews with 18 to 35-year-olds. Canada is incled.
Yay, David, thanks for thinking of us.
Yeah, of course.
But I wasn't included.
Next time we'll include you.
I was like, wait, I didn't.
And we have, I think, 4 or 5 countries in Africa, countries in Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. So it's going to be a really cool study where we can start looking at some of the same kinds of pressures, both in post-Christian societies. I think Canada is more post-Christian than the United States in many ways, but also in countries where they're majority Christian and where Christianity is sort of booming. And we see a lot of differences, but it's interesting because this is the first truly global generation. They're truly interconnected. So we've been working with World Vision on that study, and we're excited to launch that on September 10th. So it's a free webcast if you want to check it out, called Faith for the Future.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to get going now for our second interview. Is everybody good? Okay? Okay.
I hope you're good because we can just talk all day.
Yeah, we really could.
I'll just
I think you're around, right?